Hello, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us today. Today, we're talking all about digital equity, closing that digital divide, and really making sure that anyone of any background has access to the modern tools needed to uplift and empower. Specifically, we're diving closer into what brands can do and really the role of the private sector in pushing digital equity forward. I'm excited to be joined by Ellen Jakowski, Chief Sustainability and Impact Officer at HP, to talk a little bit more about this today. Ellen, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks, Mary. Happy to be here today.
Fantastic. Let's dive right in and let's start really at the base level. What is the digital divide and how is it impacting communities?
Sure. Well, the digital divide is created by the economic, educational, and social inequalities that exist between those that have access to things like hardware, connectivity, quality and relevant content, and digital literacy, and those people who don't have access to those things. And during the pandemic, I think we all saw the depth of the problem much clearer than ever before. And the challenges of digital access and literacy have always really existed around the world. But again, during this last year or so, we've really seen it with new light. There are too many instances where children have stopped learning because they didn't have the tools and the access to be able to go to school remotely. And similarly, some employees also don't have the tools and access to, quote, go to work remotely. So today, our perspective is that technology and digital literacy really should be seen as fundamental human rights. Digital equity is the path for everyone, everywhere, to have equal access to education, healthcare, and economic opportunity.
Absolutely. And we know that this digital divide, this inequality in this area doesn't impact everyone equally. I'm wondering who you're seeing as the groups who are disproportionately impacted by this issue and why.
Sure. Well, I think there are several groups that are disproportionately affected. Women and girls, people with disabilities in the US, communities of color, and other marginalized groups worldwide, including even, educators and practitioners. I think about half of the world's population, about 3.5 billion people, don't have access to the internet. And the vast majority of those populations really are existing in the least developed countries. So we know that women are 23% less likely than men to use the internet. And in some regions, that number rises up to more than 50%. And about 20% of the population that would most benefit from digital health technology, access to healthcare, are those who've been traditionally underserved, are economically disadvantaged, or are living in remote communities. So these are the audiences that we're highly focused on.
Wow, half the global population, and those are really some stark statistics. This is clearly a massive global challenge. Do we know anything about what it would take to solve it?
Well, from the research that we've done working with partners, the perspective we're bringing to this is that true digital equity really requires 4 elements. The hardware, so things that HP makes, for example, like laptops or printers. Connectivity, so access to the internet. A laptop doesn't do that much good unless you actually have access to the internet. And then, what's the content that's flowing through those tools, right? So need access to relevant, high quality content and other learning materials, and then skills to actually use the technology, the digital literacy. So those are kind of the 4 elements that we think about in terms of what really is going to create digital equity and providing access to those communities across those 4 spaces. So, closing the digital divide and creating digital equity, it's going to take a huge effort. Some have estimated it in the trillions of dollars of investment that would be needed. So what's clear as well is that no one company or organization can solve it alone. So it's going to be partnerships through ecosystems of governments, private sector, NGOs, all working together to address this collectively.
Absolutely. Wow. When you're talking in the trillions, clearly, no one company, no organization alone is going to be able to get there to tackle this issue. But we know that HP is doing a lot of really significant investment here in working to close that digital divide. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So our strategy is called sustainable impact. We've chosen those words intentionally. It's not just about the impact that we can create within our own operations, our own company, but across our entire value chain, helping our customers and the communities that we serve. And as part of that strategy, we recently announced a really ambitious goal. It's going to be tough to achieve, but it's to accelerate digital equity for 150 million people by 2030. And so to help us achieve this, we're launching a new initiative called HP Path. And PATH stands for Partnership and Technology for Humanity. It's an innovation accelerator program, and it's going to invest in local initiatives and partnerships to address the challenges in those underserved communities that we already talked about, all around the world. And it's going to have three focus areas: education, which maps to a vertical that HP clearly has, healthcare, emerging opportunities in our industry in that space, as well as creating economic opportunities. So we know that our success with this new PATH program, it's going to depend on our ability to listen and learn from the communities to really understand the root cause issues. And those are going to be different, right? Depending on, which community we're focused on. And I think that's kind of a new focus area for us as well, is really thinking about listening and learning and incorporating those solutions rather than just coming up with an idea, one set solution that's going to work for all. We've seen that doesn't work. So being highly customized in our approach is one of the key goals to what we're aiming to achieve.
I love that, the focus on listening and learning. And I feel like that's so important for businesses that are looking to tackle these kind of massive social challenges, right? It's really listening to the communities that are being impacted. And we know that HP was one of many companies to make some really bold commitments around racial and social equity in 2020, and kind of speaking around, that those concepts of listening and learning to communities. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that and how some of this work in digital equity really fits in.
Sure. So, we have a couple of programs that have been really responsive as well during, the pandemic. One of those programs is called HP Life. It's free online education opportunities. We have over 30 courses in 8 languages. And, it's a free global program. Our foundation, the HP Foundation, provides this. And it's really building on business and 21st century skills for entrepreneurs and small business owners and lifelong learners. And we've seen tremendous uptick during this time. So about 60% of our HP Life participants are female students who are looking to develop and improve their IT and business skills. And then we have all sorts of other strong partners as well who are helping us along the way, like Girl Rising and NABU. I know we're going to talk more about that in just a few minutes. But I think, programs like HP Life, again, which are really tied into the community to understand, what are the next gen skills that are needed. And we're continuing to expand that curriculum as we go.
Mm-hmm. And to speak a little bit about Girl Rising, NABU, and some of your other partners, how are you really working on these partnerships to advance some of these goals?
Yeah, and again, it goes back to, no company or organization can do it alone. And we know that. We also know where our competencies are at HP, right? For example, we have a really strong supply chain. We know how to make, awesome computers and printers. But there are a lot of things we don't know. So finding the right partners who can bring the complementary expertise and skills is increasingly important, particularly too in solving such complex, difficult problems like the digital divide. So partnerships that we have, for example, with UN Women, help us expand our reach in key regions and among key populations. We're working with UN Women, for example, to advance education, entrepreneurship, and digital learning for women and girls in 5 priority countries in Africa: the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Morocco, Nigeria, Senegal, and South Africa. And we've also just recently launched 3 new HP Life centers in Mexico. Already talked a little bit about that HP Life program, but that was in collaboration with the UN Women's Second Chance Education Program. So we also have, these other strategic partnerships, as I mentioned, like with Girl Rising and NABU, that help us bring really, new inclusive content and curriculum into classrooms for educators and learners of all ages.
Fantastic. And we're really excited to learn a little bit more about how those partnerships really look on the ground and how they're impacting communities around the world. So at this point, we'd like to welcome Nidhi Dubey. India Country Director for Girl Rising to the stage, as well as Tanyella Evans, the co-creator and executive director of NABU. Ladies, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Well, to get things started, I'd love to get to know a little bit more about each of you, your work, and the communities that you're working in. Nidhi, I'd love to start with you. Can you tell us a bit about Girl Rising and the challenges you're looking to solve and the communities you're working in?
Absolutely. So first of all, thank you for having me. And I'm so glad to be part of this conversation where we can together ensure that girls are not left behind. So thrilled to be part of this. This is so very closely aligned with Girl Rising's mission, where we bring attention to the simple truth that girls' education is a powerful tool that can actually bring intergenerational benefits. We use stories to highlight the many barriers that continue to face in their path to gain education, and we develop and implement school-based curriculum that encourages adolescents and especially girls to imagine their future differently, a future which is full of potential and possibilities, and unlike what patriarchal social norms usually prescribe. We work across several states in the country, working closely with grassroots organizations, local governments, educational institutions, and of course, corporate partners.
Fantastic. I love that. Inspiring girls to see things differently. That's just such a powerful concept on its own. Tanyella, can you tell us a little bit more about NABU as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you also for having me. We're so excited to be part of this conversation around digital equity and, the leadership that Ellen at HP and Nidhi at Girl Rising are taking on this issue. So NABU, we're a leading publisher, actually one of the only publishers of culturally appropriate early grade books in mother tongue languages. And the mission of our nonprofit is to eradicate illiteracy, which is a huge challenge affecting 250 million children globally. So we work around the world. We're partnered with the United Nations. We work in Haiti, Rwanda, Kenya. We work in the Philippines. And what we've created is a process for developing content with local communities that results in incredibly high quality, culturally relevant children's books. And then we publish those books on our free low bandwidth reading app. And we also engage thousands of reading ambassadors in the community, helping families to get connected to the literacy resources that they need.
Wow, 250 million. That's a really big number and such a fantastic ambition you all have to really look to reach those children. To quickly follow up with you, what are you seeing as some of the major barriers out there in terms of literacy for children?
Yeah, so the reasons for illiteracy are really myriad and complicated, but some of the driving factors are, first of all, children don't actually have sufficient access to reading materials, either at home or at school. Secondly, reading materials that do exist are not in children's mother tongue, so they're not in a language that they speak or understand. And then there's limited ability to really build engagement and literacy with the resources that do exist. So, for example, we started our work in Haiti, where French and English are really perceived as the language of the elite. And 95% of the population speak Haitian Creole. So you can imagine, if you put yourself in the shoes of one of our readers, Dominique, before having access to NABU, she went to school and just felt completely lost. Her whole life she'd be speaking Creole at home, and then in school she's expected to learn in French. And this is why we're seeing that, of those 250 million children, most of those children are spending 4 or more years at school and not even achieving basic literacy. They're not even able to read a word. So our belief, and it's really backed by research, is that the home literacy environment is critical to supporting children's early development of literacy and their reading achievement by grade 3, and that, culturally relevant books is a critical part of the conversation around digital equity.
Absolutely. That's such a powerful way to put that, really putting yourselves in the shoes of a child who's in this situation and who's now having to be in a learning setting, hearing languages they don't speak at home, that they're not familiar with. Nidhi, I'm wondering along the same lines, what some of the barriers you're seeing in terms of girls' education, empowerment worldwide, but specifically in the communities you're working in?
Yeah, absolutely. And also just adding to what Tanya was saying, I mean, I'd say that all the barriers that we see girls face today bear a link with the most formidable one, which is behaviors and mindsets. Now, we've seen that girls are often perceived as brides to be, as, mothers in waiting or caretakers, which has over the years, shrunk the world of possibilities and opportunities available to them. In fact, before the pandemic struck, it was very encouraging trend that we saw, especially in India, where girls and their parents were breaking millennium of stereotypes and social norms by reporting never before school-going rates in India. I mean, as per one of the reports, we saw that the dropout rate among girls actually was only 4% in 2019, which was hugely encouraging. However, as the pandemic struck and education turned digital, the disparity in access that has always been hiding in the plain sight came to the fore. So these are some of the critical barriers we see girls face in accessing education.
Wow, and I love to see here that we're on an all-woman panel here on a digital platform, really talking about these issues. I love that energy. But I'm wondering, to follow up with you, Nidhi, how do you feel that digital tools can help to overcome some of these barriers that girls are facing?
In so many different ways, Mary. I mean, I feel like girls and women have always found themselves to be one of the last cohorts to access any advancement in technology. And we know and we have to acknowledge that technology has the potential to reach far more girls, even in hard to reach communities. Across India, schools, I mean, what is the situation right now? Schools are likely to be closed for most part of the year. For many adolescents, and especially girls, the longer school closure lasts, the higher the likelihood of them never returning to school. Today, where we stand, 10 million girls are at risk of never sitting in classroom again. In fact, reports show that child marriages in India in the pandemic have increased to about 27%. It is digital technology that can help mitigate effects of pandemic and ensure that learning does not stop for girls. Now, this will, in the process, also help avert one of the biggest risks and that challenges, that out-of-school adolescent girls face, which is early and forced marriage. So if we apply that lens, we see that there are so many barriers that technology can actually help overcome.
Wow, those numbers are so stark, and I think really gets us thinking a little bit about how the pandemic has really brought these issues forward and made them so that we really can't, we can't look away, we can't ignore these issues and the impact that they're having. Daniela, I know you spoke a bit about Nabu's app and some of the ways you're leveraging technology, but can you speak a bit more about how technology can really help to overcome some of these barriers to child literacy as well?
Yeah, I mean, I will say up front that I'm a technology optimist and advocate. I think when you have simple solutions paired with, a clear problem, that's where technology can be so powerful. And we see it firsthand in our work. In just the last 90 days, our reader base has tripled from 100,000 families to over 300, almost 400,000 families who are reading on the Nabu app every day. And we're on track for 1 million readers this year. And it's powered by this culturally relevant content, right? So I think technology can be powerful also in our work. For example, in Rwanda, we have these incredible, talented creators and artists that have amazing stories to tell and contribute to the world, but they don't have the technology. They don't have access to a device that can help them to publish their work in their own voice. And to Nidhi's point, we see the young generation wanting to tell different kinds of stories. So one of the stories that was recently published from our ABC lab is about Leela, who wanted to play soccer with the boys and how she overcame being ridiculed by them. And these stories, just these little stories, are so powerful in helping children to really see themselves reflected in the stories. I wanted to bring this to life, just share one little quote from one of our readers, Belize. She's 10 years old and she lives in Rwanda. And she said, "I used to be scared of speaking in front of others, but now I'm very confident because of stories I read on NABU. They make me feel self-confident. Now I can speak and share my ideas fearlessly." And I was really privileged to get to see before the pandemic, Belize speaking in front of her class. And, these are the real life stories and impact that just keep me as a technology optimist about the power of what technology can do.
Wow, that's so great. I love that. That quote warmed my heart and really shows the impact of this work. And Ellen, I'd love to come back to you really quickly and just talk a little bit about how HP is supporting NABU and Girl Rising and their work on this issue and closing the digital divide.
Yeah. So again, what Taniela and Nidhi just, discussed with all of us, the perspective they bring, their expertise, their commitment, I think matches so well with the values that HP has, and it complements the skills we have. So together we can create what, again, Taniela just described with that example, the actual impact on the ground. That's what we're all striving for, not just, setting big goals with numbers and counting up things, but truly changing and creating that impact. So we've been working very closely with Girl Rising for a few years now. We have very strong alignment with their mission to ensure that girls around the world are educated and empowered. I think in 2019 we announced a joint ambition to equip up to 10 million students and teachers with new curriculum and technology solutions over 3 years, and bringing inclusive content. So the type of content that Taniela just talked about, and curriculum to the classrooms and educators around the world. We've reached approximately about 5 million people through the program so far. And of that total, about 4.7 million was through the partnership with Girl Rising in India, with the NGO Slam Out Loud. And they use the arts to build skills such as communication, critical thinking, and empathy for children who are coming from disadvantaged communities. So again, focusing on the neediest communities, those communities we talked about earlier. And then our relationship with NABU is a bit newer, but again, very strong alignment with their mission, since NABU, as Taniela discussed, focuses on delivering that relevant, high quality content, right? So that complements the hardware, for example, that HP can bring. But you need to have that high quality content running through the hardware to really connect. And it's a critical piece of digital equity. So we're currently partnering on the Inclusive Literacy Initiative with NABU. And so together supporting illustrators and authors to increase the content creation and book production. And that's aiming to help ensure that the children globally have access to that enriching content that, again, Taniela described, that is in their native language. So both of our partnerships with Girl Rising and NABU help support the goal of enabling better learning outcomes for 100 million people by 2025. That's a goal we set several years ago, and we're over halfway there to achieving it. So lots of great progress together. But again, HP couldn't do it alone without experts who bring those complementary skills and perspectives like NABU and Girl Rising.
Fantastic. And 4.7 million people in India alone. That's so fantastic. Nidhi, do you have anything else to add about how engagement with HP has really served to power your work?
Ellen has actually pretty much covered it all, but I will just say that we've been really fortunate to have a partner like HP that believes that collaborations are the engine of change. I love that. With support from HP, I think we've been able to do some really meaningful work on the ground, especially at the time, the crisis time that the pandemic presented. So, of course, reaching 4.7 million adolescents from across the country with our partner, really sort of creating content that was addressing social emotional skills, that was addressing skills that they needed to navigate the critical and the difficult times that they were going through. And there are so many stories like Tanya shared. There are so many stories that we keep documenting of girls from across the country just using the platform. We've we've used this platform to actually, create WhatsApp friendly, audio books, audio messages, and there are activities that, kids do across the country. And wherever WhatsApp is not possible, there is a helpline. But I am hugely, and at Girl Rising, we're just so fortunate to have this partnership to be able to deliver and reach the remotest corner of the country in a very meaningful way.
Fantastic. It's so great to hear the stories of how this work is really playing out in communities and impacting people. Daniela, I'm wondering how you feel about what you see as the potential of engaging with a large technology company like HP and what that can really do to power your work and your mission.
Yeah, as Ellen said, we're a relatively new partner of HP, but our goal is to create culturally relevant content that's going to power our shared impact goals and really close the digital divide. So as Ellen mentioned, we have a flagship project really in Kigali, Rwanda, which is this creative lab where we're going to be training hundreds of creators every year. These are often young people who, when they grew up, they only had access to books like, our old donated books like Cinderella and Rapunzel. And, some of our creators, they were reading scraps of newspaper. That's all they had access to in terms of content. So it's just going to be incredibly powerful. And I think with HP, the scale and potential reach together is huge. There are 500 million speakers of our top 4 underserved languages. So we're starting with Swahili and Kinyarwanda, but just can't wait to grow and make collections of books available to children so that they can read and rise to their full potential.
Absolutely. That's so powerful, and really enjoyed learning more about the work you both are doing and how HP's investments are really helping to push that forward and what organizations can do on the ground to really uplift this work. So thank you all so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. I know we learned a lot. And if anybody is interested in passing along any questions or comments for our panelists, there is an email address down below that you can use to reach out with that feedback. And again, thank you all so much for being with us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Mary.
Thank you.
And thanks so much to everyone out there as well. I think we all learned a lot about just the scope of this issue, right? How significant of an issue the digital divide is around the world, how it's impacting certain groups, and some action items that brands can take and just ways we can change our thinking around this to really push some positive change forward. So thanks so much again to everyone for joining us today, and I hope you have a great rest of your afternoon. And until next time.